Welcome, everyone, and hello.
Hello.
To So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games. With me, as always, is Michael Walker, who's already intruded before an introduction. It's very rude, but we will forgive it. How are you doing, Walker?
That's me.
That is indeed you.
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Glad to hear it. I am your other co-host, Mark Bigney, and we're going to be talking about board games this week. We're going to talk about the games we played last week. We're going to talk about the news and why it doesn't matter. And then our feature game. Our feature game is Ego. This is an advanced copy of a game that is currently on crowdfunding right now. It is a Reiner Knizia redevelopment of a past design, which is very much a kind of thing that he does all the time. So, with that in mind, Walker, what did you play last week?
Mark, you and I finally, thanks to your generosity, got to play a game called Freedom 5, a Sentinel Comics board game. So we love Sentinels, the card game. It's a superhero, Sadler Brothers,
No. Sadler Brothers had nothing to do with Sentinels of the Multiverse.
No, I thought they did the original.
No.
I thought they were the people that...
No, Adam Robitaro and
pioneered the power action draw.
No. I could forgive you for thinking that because the modular deck system, as we've commented a number of times, is extraordinarily reminiscent of Sentinels of the Multiverse. But no, they had nothing to do with the original design.
All right, so Sentinels of the Multiverse is a superhero card game that shouldn't work because there are dozens and dozens of heroes that get paired with dozens of places where the fight can take place, paired with dozens of different villains. And so the different lineups are endless, and the fact that it all comes together and works is fantastic.
Well, to be fair, sometimes it doesn't really work. There are some hero combinations that are not advisable against many villains. And then there are many combinations that are overpowered against many villains.
It's amazed how much it does work.
There you go. The extent to which it works is amazing.
And so now they've made a board game version of that. So a tabletop with some nice pre-painted miniatures, and it's very pandemic-like.
I would rephrase it. This is not the board game implementation of Sentinels of the Multiverse. This is the Sentinels retheming of Defenders of the Realm.
It takes place in the same world.
Yes.
And a lot of the same heroes, and they've adapted their powers or the cards that they have in their hand to reflect the cards that they would have in their deck. And like you said, it's very pandemic-y or Heroes of the Realm. You're, breaking down areas of the map that you're fighting fires all over the place, trying to chase them down. And much like you're going to say, they just don't hit the key elements that pandemic hits. Other than that, I think it really does sort of capture what I feel to be one of the best sort of superhero games that are out there at the moment. Fantasy Flight did one years ago, and it just did not hit the mark at all. No one ever talks about it. You just put some sort of newspaper clippings all over the map, and you did the same sort of thing, but was not as good. I think this is the best so far.
I prefer Hour of Need, the Sadler Brothers modular deck system game. I think Hour of Need is a pretty decent implementation of the superhero theme. But I don't think in terms of actual thematic quality, anything can touch Sentinels of the Multiverse. The sort of kayfabe, airsats, comics canon they built up is genuinely impressive. And that's one of the reasons why we keep going back to the game, because we have an enthusiasm for the universe. So there's Pandemic, and Pandemic, very much like Dominion, spawned a horde of also-rans, many of which did not understand why the game works as well as it does. And Defenders of the Realm was designed by Richard Launius, and it was sort of the fantasy adventure equivalent of Pandemic, and it's, rough. One of the reasons why many Pandemic variants don't work as well as Pandemic is because the infection deck, there's a bunch of reasons, but the infection deck becomes more determinative as the game goes on. At first, disease cubes are popping up randomly, but as it intensifies, you know that the same trouble spots are going to recur over and over. There are going to be some cities in the world where it's constantly a problem. Now, this increases the tension, but at the same time focuses your attention. Because in the context of Freedom 5 and in the context of Defenders of the Realm, it's always just this incredibly random stochastic development of threats. In Freedom 5, you can have 2 thugs, which are the equivalent of disease cubes, pop up anywhere on any given card draw. And given that 3 is the magic number, that can cause weird fires to pop up anywhere all over the map. On top of that, the key goal of many scenarios of Freedom 5, we haven't played all the scenarios, I've only glanced at a number, involve punching the crap out of villains or masterminds. Fine. They also move in a random way. And the expectation is, based on the way the powers triggers, for all of you to gather up, or several of you to gather up, gang up on the boss, and punch the crap out of them, which is okay and fine, except for the problem that, again, the bosses move randomly, and so you can try to coordinate so that, okay, I'll get here and I'll wait here, and then on your turn you're going to come and join me. Oh, wait, the boss is on the other side of the map. Okay, great. And that's extraordinarily frustrating. And on top of that, I think what you take, what many of the pandemic variants do, and Defenders in Freedom 5 absolutely do this, is they take what is a tight 70-minute formula and it bloats the length considerably, in part just because you're dragging yourself from one corner of the map to the other. And that's another thing that a lot of pandemic variants don't do. Pandemic has a lot of clever movement options. In Freedom 5, you have practically none. And this is a strange feature of a lot of superhero games, actually. Spending a lot of time trying to schlep yourself from one end of the map to the other
does not reflect the theme very well.
It's odd. Like, you're far more mobile as a member of the CDC in Pandemic than you are as someone who can literally fly at high speeds. It's strange, it's unthematic, and it's tedious. Another thing, and this is just a very, very personal element, I don't know if anyone else is like this. The moment a game has very large miniatures, or bigatures, as the Handwerker would say, if they have other miniatures, I'm unable to appreciate the other miniatures as having any kind of table presence, even if they're relatively large. I had the same problem with Primal the Awakening, because Primal the Awakening has these huge boss miniatures, and then the other miniatures are in heroic scale. They're bigger than 28 mil, but they look so small compared to the large dragons or turtle monsters or dinosaurs, and so I'm not able to appreciate the miniatures. I paid through the nose for you people, you ungrateful wretches, you dregs, you Philistines, you curs, to get pre-painted miniatures. And so we've got all these pre-painted miniatures of these characters we love, but there's also an Omnitron X, which is massive, and so none of the heroes look impressive. There are two Omnitron X's, actually. There's also one in the expansion box. Anyway, I don't know exactly what I was expecting after all these years. This is not a case, I assure you listeners, of my expectations mounting over the course of the 5 or so years we've been waiting for this to fulfill. I was always expecting it to be disappointing, again, because I knew its pedigree. I knew it was basically a variant of Defenders of the Realm, and I never liked Defenders of the Realm. But this is, I suppose, what I deserve. This is what I deserve for throwing this much money at a project so benighted and so ill-conceived. I deserve nothing better.
I enjoyed it still, and I'm looking forward to playing it again for what it is. It's a superhero, rush around, beat up thugs, try to beat up the bad guy, and I think it accomplishes what it sets out to do.
I can't even appreciate Freedom 5 on a power fantasy level because it makes you feel so feeble. In part, this is because of the mechanisms. When you fight multiple thugs, you roll 1 die per thug that's there, and you're looking for a target number based on what your hero is and what kind of thug it is. What that means is that if you're fighting, I made the joke, and I think it's relevant. It's like Andre the Giant talking to Wesley in The Princess Bride. He's like, well, I'm really good at fighting lots of people, but the techniques that you have for fighting one-on-one, it gets complicated. So if you go into a crowd of thugs and do an action to attack them, the odds of you knocking out 1 or 2 are very good, but knocking out that last one can often just be 50-50 shots. And it's one of the many ways in which I don't feel like a superhero. It's so weird. Like, you want to give people power fantasy. You want to give people a sense of interesting and cool things happening. Some of the card effects I think are neat. The hand management isn't terrible. And there are some clever bits about card recycling so as to be able to get the right cards you need, because in Pandemic, basically you're killing time until you get the cards you need to get cures. In Freedom 5, as well as Defenders, you're killing time and or spending some actions, getting the cards of the right color you need to punch out the villain or the mastermind. And there's a way to reshuffle your discard pile into your deck in many cases. Most heroes have some ability to throw actions at a problem to draw more cards. That's great. That is one thing I think that is a definite improvement upon the formula for the new setting and theme. Everything else, just it's a little sloggy. It's just short enough that I'm willing to play it a couple more times, but it's really pushing it. It's right on the boundary. it's somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes when really it wants to be around 75. And it's a little bit of a slog.
It does have a flip back and forth a little bit like the Marvel card game where you get to do some actions as a civilian, your alter ego, and then you do some other actions. And every character is different for what those actions are. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And it would be cool if you could like jump in a cab and travel quickly, as a civilian. Take the subway to the other side of the city. Something like that. No.
These heroes definitely need bus passes, that is for sure.
Yeah, it's weird. And this is designed by Richard Launius, Adam Sadler, Brady Sadler, and put out by Arcane Wonders and Greater Than Games.
More experiences with things, more experiences with rings, more experiences with the things going into the rings.
Is this a circus?
When you're playing this game, sometimes it is. So this time I suggested that we play the non-advanced version. Walker balks at the notion of playing things in rings with fewer than 3 intersecting rings.
It said the baby goo-goo.
No, Walker. It says that there's a game, and then it says that there's an advanced version, and we jumped right to the advanced version, and one of the benefits of the less advanced version is that you only have 2 criteria, and they don't have to pull from the red deck. I have yet to see a criterion from the red deck where I can say, yes, this makes sense and is reasonably clear and transparent. Because, again, the red deck has criteria like easily found if lost, or useful. I'll say it again. In the right context, everything is useful. In the wrong context, nothing is useful. There are no categorical imperatives for utility, and thus you have to make certain decisions, and whether it's a competitive or cooperative game, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity. I maintain that if you're going to play with the right criteria, and we're probably going to play it again, and so in that context, if we play with the right criteria, and I'm the knower, as the game calls it, I'm going to insist that I write down what I understand the red criterion to be before we start play, because I think that's the only way to do it. The other 2 criteria, some verbal quirk, some orthographical feature or grammatical element of the word, and then some aspect of the composition of the thing in terms of its structure or material or what have you. So this time, the 2 characteristics we had were floats, and that was the blue criterion, and the yellow criterion was the initial letter is repeated in the word. So the knower was Huey. He did a great job with his first 3 cards. He just slapped out 3 cards, and we immediately knew that the criterion was floats. He put out 3 floating things in the blue ring, that was not in the yellow ring, and we were good to go. And then we spent the rest of the time trying to kind of figure out what the yellow ring was, but we had 0 clue. Fortunately, though, even though we had no clue, we just put everything outside the yellow ring, and we were right most of the time.
Yeah, if it didn't float, then we put it in none, and we were just lucky that it worked out.
Yeah, it basically devolved into a 1-ring game with a slight possibility of being wrong. I think we were wrong like maybe twice on the verbal structure of the thing, and so we won anyway, despite having 0 understanding of it. I don't know. I don't know what to make of things in rings, man. I just don't. I find it vastly more fun when you're the knower. I find it vastly more interesting when I think the categories are defensible and intuitive. Other than that, it seems like a very, very random puzzle with unclear criteria.
I still want to play it more. I enjoy things in rings.
Things in Rings is designed by Peter C. Hayward, published by Allplay.
Mark, let's talk about City of the Six Moons. This is designed by Amabel Holland and put out by Hollandspiele. And don't worry, there'll be no spoilers.
There will also be no understanding.
There will also be no understanding. So the premise of this game is that aliens have left this game on our planet. They were observed playing it once. And they also left the rule book. Unfortunately, there is no
human language.
Well, there's no alien language either. It's all symbology.
Sure, but that's a language.
It is, but there's no actual written type language.
We don't know.
True.
You're making assumptions based on an orthographic quirk of the past few centuries. It could be a cuneiform language. It could be various other forms of symbolic representation.
True. But so if you're really good, if you're the kind of person like I am in board games that you enjoy trying to figure out what the chits say, well, to Mark's hatred,
you're always wrong.
That is wrong. What the symbology on cards or tiles or on the board, and figuring out what's going on before people waste time looking up in the book.
No, you just add more time. You add an extra intervening step.
And not only that, Mark, I make it confusing for the other players.
Yes,
because I say things. Yes, I understand. I'm on board. Anyway, long story short, you have a rule book that has no rules in it, just a bunch of symbology, and you need to completely decipher the game. What you're supposed to do in the game, how you're supposed to set up the game. It comes with, like, I think it's 54 tokens and a couple pawns and 24 cards, and you need to figure out from the base what you're doing. And so it's an interesting take. I'm wondering if it breaks down what a board game is. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's like
it's
has
definitely pushing the boundaries,
redefined what, board games are a bunch of mechanisms written on paper, and there you go. I'm not saying that's what she's saying. I'm just saying it sort of makes you look at it in a different light.
Oh, totally. Amabel Holland is one of those iconoclastic forces in the board games industry that I'm very glad she's around. I like a lot of her Cube Rail stuff. I like some of her historical things. And I also very much appreciate that she thinks outside the box. And as somebody who co-runs her own publishing house, she is answerable to no one. And so can do weird stuff like City of the Six Moons.
And they've said they will answer no questions.
She's very clear. There are some weird designer's notes that aren't really designer's notes, and that's it. She will say nothing else.
So I'm sure the community in the future will come together and agree that there is a certain way the game is to be played, but there is no definitive way, I don't think.
I don't know that you could come up with a definitive explanation.
I don't think there is. I am enjoying my time I have spent with City of the Six Moons so far. You get to make some interesting sort of inferences, by leafing through the book and backporting some symbols and way diagrams anyway. Can't wait to spend more time with it.
I acquired it from Hollandspiele in part because I was so intrigued by the premise and because I enjoy supporting Hollandspiele as an independent publisher of really interesting stuff. And it was kind of arrived at the same time as a glut of other things. And then Walker expressed some interest. I'm like, here, take it. And sure enough, seeing him grapple with, in a serious way, not like being daunted or anything, but grapple with the documentation that's provided such as it is, as well as various other clues, really, really emphasized what I kind of already suspected. City of the Six Moons is most definitively, extraordinarily, not for me. I have commented before in the podcast about my aversion to puzzles. I have commented before that the kind of puzzle that I like the least is the one where even the broad parameters of the puzzle are not known. Various tile switching or combinatoric puzzles I find relatively tedious even when I understand the broad parameters. But when the parameters aren't even transparent, I nope out immediately. It's just not the kind of thing I enjoy. It's not the kind of thing that I'm good at. Keep in mind, there are lots of things that I'm no good at that I very much enjoy. Puzzles are not one of them. And so I'm glad that Walker has been able to approve of it. And I am not going to touch that thing with a 10-foot
everyone
pole.
I've showed it to have just, given their head a shake and no idea. It is something.
It is impressively opaque.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily shock me. I'd be curious if you come up with some sort of understanding or thesis about how it works in some vaguely comprehensive way. I would be curious to hear it. Past that, I'm more than happy to look at City of the Six Moons as well as a lot of the other output of Amabel Holland and say, that is really impressive, and I'm very glad this exists, and I don't want any part of it.
So the one thing I say is written right on the box, so it's not as though it's spoilers, and I find it very intriguing, that part, is the fact that they sort of reflect. They said, we think it might be a solo game because only one of the aliens was manipulating the pieces while all of the other aliens were chatting amongst themselves.
Yeah, it seemed like some sort of very kibbutzing going on, but the extent to which is unclear.
So I love that sort of is it? As you're figuring out.
Oh,
right?
yeah. It's not enough that she's going to give you this box of stuff and not tell you anything about it. She might be actively messing with you.
Oh, she is.
Yeah. It's like, I half expect Amabel Holland to show up at your door at some point while you're doing it and say, look over there, and mix up the cards while you're not looking.
Steal 4 of the tokens.
Remove some number. Exactly. Introduce a new one that hadn't been there before. Yeah. That sounds great. City of the Six Moons. Performance art.
More to come?
Maybe. Got to play another game of Lost Cities Rivals. This is a small box Knizia card game that I don't get to play enough. This is a sort of hybrid of 3 of Reiner Knizia's classics. One of them being Lost Cities, one of them being Raw, and one of them being Traumfabrik or Dream Factory or Hollywood Dream Factory or whatever version you've got, the auction game. The auction element is only a little bit inspired by Traumfabrik. It's a closed economy auction where at regular periods, the money that you have spent gets redistributed throughout all the other players. What that does is it really doubles down on the tempo elements of games like Raw and Lost Cities already, because if you spend too much early in the round, you basically get to sit and watch as everyone else snatches up the cheap cards that you desperately want. The fundamental card play of Lost Cities is preserved, but the way you get the cards isn't from a blind draw from the deck or from a tableau. It is by winning auctions. And when you win an auction, you're obliged to add all the cards you can add to your tableau. So for those of you that remember Lost Cities, you start out low and you want to build up high. So if you're sitting there and you've got, you really want to do well in white, your white expedition is the one that you really want to do well. And you're sitting there and there's an auction lot that comes up and the white 7 is involved. You really have to think twice about whether or not you want to bid on that auction, because you're only allowed every time you win an auction to bin one of the cards. Everything else has to get played if it can get played. If you're already on 8 on the white, you don't care. The 7's just dead weight to you. It's useless. It's going to sit around for the next chump. But on the other hand, if you're not relatively indifferent to white, you can win the 7. You don't need to do well in every expedition. Anyway, these are the kinds of considerations that really add a lot of texture to the whether and how you want to bid in Lost Cities Rivals. And as well, it captures a lot of what makes Lost Cities interesting in terms of the risk, reward, and press your luck, but in a multiplayer format, very much like Lost Cities, the board game, does. As somebody who really likes Reiner Knizia auction games and enjoys the scoring system of Lost Cities, I really like Lost Cities Rivals. It is very luck-driven, though, in terms of what cards come up when. I mean, the same is true of a lot of random lot auction games, but in terms of Lost Cities Rivals, the asymmetry of when the high-value cards, the high-numbered cards, rather, come up for different expeditions can really negatively impact some players as opposed to others. I mean, yeah, in Raw, sometimes the disaster comes out that you don't care about, but that's usually the exception rather than the rule in terms of determining the relative value of lots. Lost Cities Rivals really leans into that. So I appreciate the fact that it's relatively quick and it's relatively rules-light and the scoring is very, very transparent. All things that can be the bugbear of some other economic games. I think Lost Cities Rivals is underappreciated. It's a great, cheap, and cheerful package, and it's a multiplayer auction game with a great sense of tempo and a great sense of risk. And it's good for people who enjoy those other designs from which it cribs, as well as people unfamiliar. So very, very pleased to have played another game of Lost Cities Rivals.
I'm going to talk about another crowdfunding game that came in that Mark and I were lucky enough to play. This is designed by Fernando Eduardo Sánchez and put out by Two Tomatoes Games. It is called Through Ice and Snow, and sort of based on trying to find the Northwest Passage back in the day. And they say it was to find an alternate route to Asia, but I feel as though it was more like mountain climbing, where they wanted to do it just because it's there. Because it doesn't make sense, right? They're using so much dynamite to blast their way through, and it's only going to freeze again. So even if they do find it, I cannot see where it would be a legitimate passage. So I really feel as though these explorers were mostly doing it just because they could, they wanted the fame of actually finding, a passage through. Anyway.
I know absolutely nothing about the process of charting out the Northwest Passage, but that definitely sounds like the motivational structure of a lot of explorers/adventurers of the time.
Yeah. And so they also put in a little bit of Darwin's journey in there, because you're also collecting specimens as you go. You're mapping out the side. It's a worker placement where you have certain colored workers as your officers, and you have standard sailors, and then you recruit Inuit as well.
Inuit
for
from the Inuit people.
Yeah.
Well, it's worth stressing, because I really appreciate the extent to which the designer really wanted to give full credit to the Inuit people that were involved. So, for example, there's a set of historical notes about the various sponsors of the expedition. So, the British Museum sponsored an expedition, and Oxford sponsored the expedition, and so forth. But equal billing is given to various Inuit guides that were involved in these various expeditions, some of whom may have thought that this was a stupid endeavor, or maybe not. But, they're named and their roles are given prominence, and so this is not just the story of a whole bunch of European agents and their local help. This is a story about European adventurers and Inuit people. And so it really gives a lot of texture and more agency to people. And the Inuit language is represented on the map. So there's the European name for Baffin Island, and then there's also the Inuit name, and the in the Inuit script as well, the Inuit syllabary. And so it really gave it a better sense of place, a better sense of texture, a better sense of historicity, a better sense of verisimilitude, as well as just being more interesting as a consequence.
Yeah, it came with maps, all sorts of stuff. I very much enjoyed it. I played it 3 times this week. And so it is a super tight worker placement, because not only do you have to feed all of your workers, you have to make sure you have enough fuel for the boats, you have to have enough dynamite to blast your way through the ice. There's times you want to be the leader, times you don't. Then on top of this, there's all the places you want to go to score points. You want to be the best, at the end. And so technically every player is on their own ship, but you have to stay together as a fleet. So sometimes some people will run out of fuel and you have to tow them. There's a whole sort of scoring mechanism for that, and running out of food and what you have to eat instead of, your rations. You might have sled dogs, or you might have other things. Anyway, much to like for Through Ice and Snow.
I only played it the once with you, and we played it 2-player, and my understanding is that one of my objections was very much addressed in multiplayer, because with 2-player, the resources seemed too plentiful. It seemed like too easy a thing to do to keep everyone fed and happy and make sure you had all the resources to get to the next place. But your assertion is that in multiplayer, that's not true.
As soon as we went to 3, everything ran out. We had people running out of fuel, everyone was running out of food. We were even running out of dynamite. If you run out of dynamite, the game's just over.
Right.
Everyone loses. So we were like, it says it's semi-co-op, and I believe it is, because we were divvying up who was going to get the dynamite and get the food so we wouldn't lose the game.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Oh, that sounds cool. I wasn't a huge fan of the way worker placement works. It just felt very, very restrictive, because there are 3 categories of actions, and each category, most of the time, there are some exceptions, will involve the officer of that color. So effectively, you're just choosing 3 available actions, rather than your slightly more flexible worker placement games. I mean, not everything needs to have the dense matrix of available options of a Feast for Odin. But in a Feast for Odin, the fact that that different actions take different number of workers mean you truly get a variety in terms of how many different actions you can do. In Through Ice and Snow, you're going to be doing 3 actions, more or less. Like, that's pretty much the standard. And I also feel that it takes away a lot of the competition. Like, if somebody has already placed their red officer, you just know they can't go in any of this column, and so it kind of makes things a little anticlimactic from that side. I mean, there is competition for the various actions, make no mistake, but ultimately the jockeying sort of narrows in interest as the round goes on, and very often by the end of it, you just go, I don't really have much to do, frankly.
There are some things that will bypass that. There's ship upgrades that you can get that will allow you to use your normal sailors as officers, so that might mix that up a little.
That's true, especially with all those excess resources that you always have in the multiplayer
Yes, unfortunately, those upgrades cost a lot of wood. Unfortunately, you need wood for all sorts of things. So yes, it's very tight in all ways. I do want to play it more. I lift up the insert and put so much content underneath, like extra modules and extra stuff.
There's a lot of, it looks like crowdfunding bloat, to be frank. It looks like a lot of extra modules that don't really serve much purpose.
Now that I fairly know the rules, I'm going to go back over it and see which of it. Like, I almost added some of it in for, we did stream it on Saturday as well, so if you want to check it out, you can see our live channel on YouTube to see it. I was tempted to put some of the stuff in because you and I had such an easy time. I said, okay, well, I really want to put one other thing in just to try to edge it towards being harder. And thankfully I didn't, because it quickly turned drastic.
All told, I like the theming, I like the framing, I like the fact that they've done the work and they've contracted cultural consultants. All of that makes me happy. But the fundamental worker placement left me a little cold. No pun intended.
Oof.
Oh, I'm sorry, I walked into that one. No, that was the kind of thing where the sentence had been formed in my head, and I realized I was heading to disaster, and I just couldn't stop it.
Yeah, I would never say anything like that. I really enjoyed my playing, and I'm hungry to play more.
It's the hypocrisy, Walker. It's the brazen hypocrisy. And your sense of self-satisfaction, all of these factors just make it intolerable.
You forgot the severe smug look.
That would be the aforementioned sense of satisfaction. Played more of Don't Llama Dice. I mention this because it's important that this be memorialized for posterity. In Don't Llama Dice, you can shed points by going out of the round, which is good because then everyone else is stuck with the points that they have, and points are bad in Don't Llama Dice. So if you go out, especially when other people are sitting on a large number of points, that's definitely to your advantage. And in the process, you get to lose a point. Point chips come in either 10s or 1s, and so if you have 10 or more points, going out lets you lose 10 points. That's great. Or if you roll Trip Llama, the Trip Llama lets you lose
a chip.
I most frequently, I believe, the most frequent times that I have rolled Trip Llamas are in the first hand of the game when I have 0 points, when Trip Llama is, in point of fact, the worst roll you can make because you don't even get to shed any points with it, and you don't get to lose any cards. But anyway, moving on. So, Huey ended a round with 35 points. The game ends when someone cracks 40.
Points are bad.
Points are bad. And so he had 30. I was figuring, okay, we're in the end game now. There's going to be 1 round left max. And I was doing pretty well. I think I had the lowest score at the time, so I thought I was going to be doing all right. So he goes out in the round. Okay, fine. Now he's down to 25. All right, okay, whatever. I can work with this. I was still like below 12, I believe. He then proceeds for the next 2 rolls to roll Triple Llama. I'm not kidding. He rolled 2 Triple Llamas in a row at the top of the round. So he started at 35. He ends the round and goes out, so he goes down to 25. He sheds 2 10-value chips, goes down to 5 from 35. Then his next roll was a normal roll. We're like, okay, the insanity is over. And then he rolls Triple Llama again. Out of 4 possible rolls, he sheds 3 times. And then it was I couldn't believe it. The llamas truly smiled upon him that day.
The llama gods smiled.
Yeah.
Did he end up winning, though? That's the question.
No, I still won.
Oh, okay.
So ultimately, justice was reasserted. The natural order of things reasserts itself. But I couldn't believe it. Triple llama, momentary pause. Triple llama.
And to shed that many points.
Yeah.
Awesome.
From 35 down to 4.
This is what makes Llama Dice so awesome.
Well.
Speaking of games that are awesome, Mark, we, after a long drought, got to bring back Cockroach Poker to the table. This is designed by Jacques Zeimet and put out by Magier Spiele. And it is a great lying, bluffing game that I very much enjoy.
It is wonderful. You slide over a bit of vermin. You make a claim about the vermin. This is a cockroach. And the other person has to decide whether or not they're going to call your bluff. One of the things that I'm really appreciating about Cockroach Poker is that, to a certain extent, obviously, you need to know when to lie and you need to know when to call someone's bluff. But I find equally valuable from a defensive position is knowing when people are going to do neither and take what I genuinely think to be the coward's way out. Because instead of calling someone's bluff, you also have the option of usually looking at the card and then just making another claim to somebody else, or the same claim. And a lot of people think that this is a smart play, and often it is, but it's definitely overused. Because the person whose turn it is to pass a card, they're subjecting themselves to risk. And if you pass that card on elsewhere, you are completely absolving them of that risk. Now, done offensively, this is a very potent weapon, because in Cockroach Poker, there is only one loser, and the rest of people win. So this is a game, I've said it before, is about bullying. The moment somebody shows a bit of weakness, is on the precipice of getting their 4th card of the same type, the moment they even get their 2nd card, it is time to gang up on them. And so what you really have to do is acknowledge the fact that any time that person who's on the precipice of losing is passing anybody a card, letting them off the hook is a mistake. You absolutely need to be willing to take the hit and try to figure out if they're bluffing or not. And which leads into the other aspect that I constantly highlight as the truly brilliant aspect of Cockroach Poker. It's not just a series of stochastic lies. Although that would be a good tagline for a box. A series of stochastic lies. It is also about probabilistic manipulation, knowing how many of the cards are in play, how likely it is that they've got that card, how likely they are going to be to react in danger. they're sitting on 3 scorpions and they're passing you cards saying it's a scorpion. There's a lot going on there. And that's what I really appreciate about Cockroach Poker.
And giving great facial gestures as you pass cards and manipulating other people.
I maintain that Louis, because he is masked, has an unfair advantage.
Yeah, that was not fair.
I'm willing to extend him, of course, that I never in a million years will actually give anyone any problems for wearing a mask in any context. That is fine. I'm not one of those people. I'm just saying.
Cheater. And the other part I thought was funny, like as I was playing, I was like, man, I wonder why they haven't, rethemed this. And I was thinking, and then the first person like flipped up their card and had to keep it, and like the smug, evil look on all of these animals and insects' faces.
Oh, the art's great.
And I was just like, no, I would never want a different version of that, because you look at it and then they look back at you with their beady little eyes, and you're like, oh, stink bug, I can't believe you've done this to me. And then it's great.
Stinkbug, though, in all seriousness, is the one weak part of Cockroach Poker, because all the other ones are very transparent. That's obviously a rat. That's obviously a fly. That's obviously a toad or a frog. Whatever. It doesn't matter.
Well, have you ever actually heard of an actual stink bug, like in real life? I've never heard.
I've heard of the notion, but I don't know if it's actually a specific type of bug or anything of the sort.
Which I mean, that's what's weird about it. All the other ones are definite, straight up.
The problem is that it's the only type of card you're showing it to a new group of people, even to children or whatever. They know what a scorpion looks like. They know what a spider looks like. But then there's this bug, and so somebody. Usually, if you forget to stress it during the rules explanation, by the way, the one that you can't recognize is a stink bug, and you can even show them the card or the color or what have you. But if you neglect to do that, which is all too easy to do, then someone's going to have to be in a position of revealing that they have a card of that in their hand. And that's not something you want to do, ideally, in a game of this ilk. So,
definitely what you don't want to do is, once you get 2 or 3 of a card, immediately trying to start shedding those cards out of your hand. It is good, but don't jump on that right away.
Yeah, no, it's an act of panic. Like I say, you sometimes, though, you then engage in the I can't drink the wine in front of me by thinking, oh, they won't expect me to panic and start shedding the cards, so then maybe I should start shedding the cards because they won't expect it. But such are the glories of Cockroach Poker.
Mark, I got to play a new Buzz game. It's called Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth. So they've got Splendor Duel and they've got Seven Wonders Duel. And it's my opinion that they've sort of merged this all together to give it this Lord of the Rings theme type duel game. This is by Bruno Cathala and Antoine Bauza, put out by Repos Production. They always do nice stuff. Art's by Vincent Dutrait, so it looks fantastic. And so much like, Seven Wonders Duel, you're making these little pyramids of cards and you get to take turns drafting off the bottom, right? And new cards get revealed, and it has this interesting track of the ring wraiths chasing the hobbits. And it's sort of like a clear plastic thing where the ring wraith can slide up and down the same tray as the hobbits move. So the ring wraith never gets further away from the hobbits, but the hobbits get closer to Mount Doom.
I see.
If that makes sense to you. So there's rings that come up that let you move on that track. You're also trying to, mobilize the rest of Middle-earth to fight against Sauron. You're doing different things, trying to get map presence and or to Mount Doom or different victory conditions. And it's just pretty well a straight up game of draft the right cards when they come up and deny your opponent the cards they need.
Sure. I mean, that's an accurate description of what one wants to do in any drafting game.
True, but I just mean, I think if whoever does it best will be the winner.
Sorry, whoever plays the drafting game best will probably win the drafting game?
Exactly.
These are stunning insights.
I know. Well, this is why I get paid for this, Mark.
My mind is blown.
Yeah,
Wait, you get paid?
Anyway, long story short, I think it is pretty good due to the fact that it is very easy to teach. It follows all the main plot points of the movie. Your battles are happening.
Oh, it's based on a movie.
Yeah, it's Lord of the Rings. You might have heard of it.
Okay. Is Tom Bombadil in the game?
I think so. I'd have to go through all the
really?
cards. I'd have to go through all the cards. Lots of art. I'm sure he's in there somewhere.
Sure.
I found it interesting. Only played it the once so far. Want to play it again.
You had previously played Seven Wonders Duel before, correct?
I played Seven Wonders Duel online, and I own Splendor Duel, and I've played it a few times as well.
I see.
And like I said, they've sort of merged them all together. You're doing a little bit of Splendor stuff, a little bit of the Seven Wonders Duel stuff. sort of all merged together in this Lord of the Rings game. I like it. Lastly, I didn't play Harmonies last week, Mark. I played Harmonies this week. That's the end of Harmonies. We talk about it too much. It is a great sort of making little biomes for animals, drafting tiles, discs, building this interesting little map, trying to do long rivers and mountain ranges and trees. I very much enjoy it. Harmonies.
Harmonies is designed by Johan Benvenuto and published by Libelud.
Those are the games we played this week. Now for a quick break to pay some bills. And we're back with the news and why it doesn't matter. Mark, GMT Games. I'm going to talk about GMT Games. Mark the calendar.
Sure.
They're putting out a 20th anniversary Hall of Fame edition of Twilight Struggle.
Oh.
So you can go to their website. I love their website. I've never been, surprisingly, Mark. I know this will surprise you. I have never been to the GMT website before. And their website's great. They have all of, like the extra stuff you need for the game that you want to, the
resources are very well organized.
Vassal files, the rule books, all of the different review links are all there. Anyway, Twilight Struggle, if it's a game you're ever interested in, it's a game where you're going through a deck of cards. It deals with the Cold War. It is a game where you will benefit more knowing the cards that are in the deck, knowing, how much certain cards are going to change the board up. The map's going to be now double-sided. They're going to add some more stuff. So if you enjoy Twilight Struggle, check it out.
On the topic of reprints, CMYK has acquired the rights to Magical Athlete and will be reprinting it sometime next year. Magical Athlete is an endlessly charming roll-to-move game in which you play as various fantasy athletes with a variety of strange and outre powers. The powers have been redesigned by one Richard Garfield, who is definitely no stranger to such things, and so there's going to be some variation from the original designed and published by Takashi Ishida. I am very much looking forward to it. CMYK is a publisher that has been reliably excellent in its choices of projects. We most recently played from them Wilmot's Warehouse, which was borderline revelatory. And I've always enjoyed Magical Athlete, and I'm glad that it's going to be back in print, and I'm eager to see what they've done with it. That is the CMYK reprint of Magical Athlete.
Well, we enjoy a lot of games from Devier, and they've announced a bunch of games. They had a big one this summer called Hard Rock 1977 that for whatever reason I have no interest in. I think it's just the theme. I have no interest in that theme whatsoever. So I really have.
You will not shut up about Kiss.
I know.
You just will. That is all you ever. You're
exactly what you just said. That is all.
Okay.
I ever talk about.
Okay.
Anyway, things they do have coming up though. They have a expansion to White Castle. They have a game called Ring Ring, where it's sort of like no communication type game, trying to cover up pictures and stuff, which might be interesting. They have The Guest, which is going to be a hidden role type game that seemed very interesting. They have The Covenant, which is not Lord of the Rings. You are dwarves. You are rebuilding your mountain sanctuary. Not Lord of the Rings, though. Then there is a either co-op or solo game called Ace of Spades, where you're playing poker hands against zombies that are, attacking you.
Is this the inevitable card game version of Balatro?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel as though it's going to have some very similar things. And then there is one that I already talked about, but because it's designed by Daniel Ticini, it's called Transgalactica. It'll be the heaviest one out of the bunch for sure. It looks good. There's one called Deep Dreams, where you're sort of manipulating a young person's dream. You're trying to keep them on track. So you're like playing cards, trying to...
Come on, kid. This dream has an agenda. Can
yeah,
you keep
exactly.
Schedule?
You're trying to make sure he doesn't go into the dark too much. And then there's a great one, Mark, just because of the line it says. It's called All Aboard. So it's about animals on a boat, right?
Are they anthropomorphic?
Yes, because they can talk. So
okay.
It says, the elephant shouts, "We're sinking! That mouse is too heavy!" The line says, "Don't worry." The line says, "Don't worry. If I eat the giraffe, we'll lose a little weight."
That's not how weight works, lion. Your premise is fundamentally flawed.
I just think it's hilarious.
Okay. Is it a negotiation? If it's not a negotiation game, I'm not interested.
I think it might be. I think it's much like an all aboard type,
Okay.
When you're negotiating
All right.
who's going to get booted off the raft as...
Like lifeboats.
Yeah.
Or lifeboat, for that matter.
Anyway, that's the upcoming docket from Devier Games.
Burned is up on Kickstarter again. Burned is by John Moffat and is, trying to be published by Stone Circle Games. It is probably my favorite hidden movement game. It is incredibly tight and brutal and to the point, and it dispenses with all the setup and gets right to the good stuff, which is to say the cat and mouse excellence of trying to figure out where your opponent is and then trying to execute them once you find them. And the asymmetry is extraordinarily well done. There's lots of toys to play with and kits and variety. We had a pre-production copy and had a great time with it, and I am very hopeful that this time it will be funded, so you can go check out Burned on Kickstarter. So that is the news and why it doesn't matter. We now move on to our feature game. Our feature game this week is Ego, designed by Reiner Knizia. It is set to be published next year by Bitewing Games. Reiner Knizia has, designed a game or two. But of particular note, I would say, is his game Beowulf the Legend, which is one of my favorite games of all time. It was published in 2005, and it was a sort of kind of thing that we are going to be talking about a lot over the course of the review. Walker, why don't you give us an unhelpful summary about what one does in Ego?
In Ego, you're pretty well just doing hand management. You're going through a series of auctions, and it's not necessarily that you want to win all the auctions, you just don't want to lose all of the auctions, because everyone gets either a penalty or a benefit, and you just don't want to come last all the time. And you want to make sure you have enough cards through all these different trials, auctions, showing your hands, different things. Even at the very end, you get to cash in your cards for points. So you really need to just figure out how you want to spend these cards and when to spend them.
So Ego is an acronym for Extraterrestrial Greeting Organization. The original theme was a great example, I think, of very characteristic quality Euro theming. The Euro theming element, which was not particularly good, was that you play as people following Beowulf around, and you're just trying to become Beowulf's heir because, spoiler alert, Beowulf does not survive the events of the epic. But it nonetheless, I think, did a very good job of evoking some of the core thematic elements of the source material about risk, about bravado, about managing wounds, about pushing yourself as far as your decrepit, bleeding body will take you, all for the sake of some degree of temporal glory. Ego has rethemed this to something about aliens.
Yes, we have discovered all sorts of alien races in the far-off galaxy, so we've come together as members of the Milky Way. No, not Milky Way. Of the Solar.
Which is in the Milky Way.
Which is in the Milky Way. Well, some of these races are also in the Milky Way. So
okay,
I want to say of the Milky Way. So we've all built this ship, and we've put our ambassadors on it, and we're going to go out and meet these new people, and we want to put our best foot forward and be, best representatives Earth.
Walker, best foot forward is a little speciesist. I wouldn't necessarily want to commit to that.
I'm sorry.
You're going to have to take an offense.
Best appendage forward.
You're going to have to take an offense token for that.
I will.
The aliens are going to be very, very upset.
Yeah, that is bad.
Okay, let me ask you a question, Walker, because I'm genuinely curious. So in the Beowulf game, you would occasionally have events like, now you're fighting the dragon. Now you're partying at King Hygelac's court and things of that nature. To what extent do you think the thematic evocation of Ego is better or worse or equivalent to than the thematic evocation of Beowulf the Legend? And I ask in part because this is a very controversial topic.
Well, in Beowulf, you're doing the same thing, and then they want you to interpret it as different things. In Ego, you're pretty well doing the same thing. You're just trying to impress the aliens. You're going to dinners and stuff and just using your charisma and trying to outplay the other players.
Oh, you got to use that Riz.
So I feel as though it's slightly better represented in Ego.
Wow, okay. No, I hear what you're saying, though.
That being said, the iconography and the design, I feel, is much better in Beowulf.
Yes.
Because you have axes, you have helmets, you have shields. All of these things, you can see and understand what they are.
They're clearly differentiated.
Yes.
I would argue, we disagree about that, that's fine, that the differentiation also helps with the actual theming of the events, because the different suits are relevant for different kinds of events. And sometimes you're fighting Grendel, in which case you really need fists, which represent strength, and axes, which represent combat acuity. And sometimes, again, you're going to King Hygelac's court, in which case you need to be able to travel, and you need... there at least... And look, I'm not saying it's huge, I'm just saying it's there. In the context of Ego, despite having played several times, I don't know what the suits mean, and I still have sometimes difficulty differentiating them from each other.
Yeah, we've pretty well made up what they mean.
Yeah.
I've called gifts gifts. They are gifts, because it's the only one I can remember. The rest is the shouty face, the weird purple head.
There's so many different faces.
The Riz.
The Riz we remember because it's funny.
And the eyeball.
Yeah, but there's so many different faces, and it's not... Ultimately, while this partially, I suspect, is because of some enthusiasm for the source material, I would look and remember and refer to what the various events in the Beowulf game are called. In Ego, some of them are labeled, some of them are not, but they're very generic. And so it doesn't really seem to add to much. And then the cards are all generic, and it's frankly... It's not even a thematic step back. I think, as you pointed out, it's also a step back in terms of usability. It's very difficult to remember. We would reliably have people confusing which suits were involved in various challenges because there's these very abstract shapes. I don't know. I would not have designed it that way.
And it has less suits. So we're going down from 5 suits down to 4 suits.
Yes.
So there's a key part of the game, which we'll talk about later, which is the risk, and that will totally manipulate how that works. But I do want to talk, since let's start at the beginning, I want to talk about how quickly it sets up. You just have you put out the 5 boards, and you're pretty, shuffle the main deck, and you're pretty well ready to go. Like, you don't even have to deal with the cards, because dealing with the cards is the first space. You move this spaceship, and it goes on this path through the galaxy, or however you want to do it, and you do all these different trials, and... Like I said, out of the box, it's pretty well... Even with the expansions, there's adding a few boards onto the ends. Either way, you're going.
Absolutely. And as part of the setup, that leads to, I think, the chief advantage that Ego has over Beowulf, and that's the variability of the board. Beowulf is a fixed path. You're always going to have the same encounters in the same order. In Ego, there is a definite endpoint, and there's a definite beginning, but all the boards in the middle can come up in a random order, and you're not even going to use all the boards every time. And on top of that, you have a great degree of flexibility as to how many additional boards and other modules you add. It's not like a very long list of 6 to 12 mini modules that you might add. This is not like something from Magier or crowdfunding. But it is the case that there's the basic game without any of the additional sideboards, and then you can just make the boards a little bit larger, which I highly recommend, by the way, for everybody, even on their first play, because it makes money more consequential and more interesting in that sense. This, for what it's worth, maps on to a little bit to the basic versus advanced version of Beowulf the Legend.
Something else that is static in Beowulf is there are these power cards in Ego, and there's the special cards in Beowulf. In Beowulf, they're very particular to each scenario. It's like
they're fixed,
the witch is here, so you're going to get the witch card if you pick that bonus.
How dare you call Queen Wealthau a witch? That is terrible.
In Ego, you have this 5 card sort of display that you get to choose from. And so it's, it'll change it up that much more as well.
Yeah, the deck of special cards is kind of cool. Like, some of the effects are indeed very reminiscent of past ones, but some of them are brand new, and it changes the relative value of various rewards to a certain extent. I'm not a huge fan of the way a lot of the new encounters work. I mean, seldom is it the case that the relative merit of a bonus card will make you want to choose one reward as opposed to the other. But in those contexts, there are some encounters where everyone is going to end up with a bonus card. And in those cases, drafting really does matter, because some of them do seem more useful than others, which is good.
And I do want to say the flow, because there's a lot of parts in the game are auctions. So the more players, the better.
Yes.
It does play 5, and the flow is great with 5. It plays very quickly at 5. And even if you play less, it comes with these, nice little wooden shapes that will block out different parts of the map as you go along to make it that much easier.
And it just makes the rewards pool more interesting.
Yes.
When you're playing with 5. It's not even just that you're competing with more players. It's just that when you're blocking off some of the rewards pool, sometimes it just becomes closer to an unsatisfying binary.
So, besides the 2 types of auctions, the rest of everything else is just sort of like, buffing up your hand more, or switching out cards, or or doing other things. So the main part of the game are the two types of auctions. One is just simply it's looking for a couple of the 2 of the 4 different symbols, and then you decide underneath the table how many cards you're going to commit to that, and then you all reveal at the same time, and whoever has the most will get to take the best reward, and it just goes down from there, and then you choose your rewards.
Well, there are choice of rewards because again, sometimes they're incommensurate.
Yes.
That is, so this is a good news, bad news situation under the same topic, because another mechanical innovation that Eco does upon the formula is tiebreakers are much more satisfying than they were in Beowulf. Beowulf was just turn order, and so sometimes you would really like to be sitting to the left of the start player, because that meant you get to break ties for no good reason in the context of the simultaneous auctions, because these are pretty coarse auctions. The simultaneous play ones, it might be 3 and 4 and, like a 3-way tie in some cases, and their tiebreaker really matters. In Ego, there's a tiebreaker number on every card. You have the highest number, and that determines which card you want to select. And so it adds to the hand management. I really like that. That's a definite improvement. I wish you could backport it into Beowulf.
And the other type of auction is the standard going around the table until people pass out, which is interesting in many ways, because now we're going to talk about the risk system in the game, and it's represented in multiple places. It's represented in this type of auction, and sometimes it's just a straight up risk where it's like you want to try to get some cards into your hand. Well, you're going to have to flip up 4 of them, and you get to keep the ones that match. And if one doesn't match, then you get the penalty. If they all match, you don't. And if they all fail to match, then you also don't get the penalty. Or before you're going to bid, if you need to bid, you can say you're going to risk. And it's normally you flip up 2 cards, and any ones that match the symbols you're looking for get to be added to your bid. And if you didn't match them both, you take the penalty. And if you failed both, then you're out of the auction.
To me, it feels less like a risk in a number of ways. It seems more like a straightforward trade for a slightly variable benefit. I'm going to take this penalty token. And now there's only one kind of penalty token. They just add up with sort of a triangular scoring at the end of the game. And you're almost certainly going to get a match, with the slight possibility of being relatively unlucky and not getting any matches, but that seldom happens. And with a slightly more likely but still unlikely possibility of everything matching, in which case you get a bonanza. So most of the time, it's just a less satisfying straight resource exchange rather than a risk about the with some teeth to it and the possibility of failure. And then just sometimes some really lucky jerks get away scot-free with more cards and no cost associated to it. It's like saying, well, you can pay $5 for a handful of jelly beans, but every once in a while I'm just going to give you 2 handfuls and it's not going to cost you anything. That was possibly the worst analogy in the history of all analogies.
It was pretty rough.
It was... I would like to say it is not reflective of the official editorial standards here at So Very Wrong About Games. I'm deeply apologetic. I'm going to draft a letter of apology right now.
I think what this does do is leads to a little bit more exciting auctions.
Dear listeners.
A longer auction. We had some auctions that went for a long time because people just kept risking.
I can only blame Walker. Sorry, go on.
And so the other players sometimes get to sit back and fiddle their fingers and enjoy the fact that people are reducing their hands down to nothing. Anyway, I find it seems to make...
That's just core to the design.
True.
Like that's always been the case. It is always the case that you have to figure out when is it in my interest. This is the core genius of the design, and it's still preserved in Ego. You have to decide when you have to go deep and fight for that marginal position. You have to decide sometimes when it's better to cut your losses and accept that you're going to get something terrible. Sometimes it's just a strict economic calculation of I'm going to get something good, but how much do I want the thing that's better? Again, that's why it's better with more players. You have a bigger variety of rewards that you need to consider. And sometimes it's even slightly political or inferential in the sense that, well, there's no real reason for me to fight for first place because I know Huey, if he wins first place, he's not going to take the thing that I want. So there's no difference to me between second and first. So, all right, fine, I'm out.
Yeah.
The way risks work is now very different. I think one kind of funny. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's definitely funny. Consequence of the way risking works in Ego now is it's just encouraging people to like lose 6 points on the way to winning 5, which is kind of hilarious. We definitely saw that a couple times over the course of playing Ego. Someone's like really feeling committed. They've already put in 10 cards to this auction.
This is what I'm saying. It's not as though they really want to win something, but the auction has gone so long.
The sunk cost fallacy.
It makes them feel as though they have to stay in and win. They've risked so many times.
Yes.
Win or bust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. That logic definitely has changed contours. But honestly, I've said this before. I preferred the scratch and wound system from Beowulf because I felt it had more texture. There were circumstances where you were fresh up, you were ready, you could risk, you were in a position where you could afford to take some risky chances and, the consequences wouldn't harm you as much, as opposed to just accreting this resource that's just like a budget of how often you get to make this exchange. And it doesn't move me as much, and it makes the encounters feel a little bit more one note rather than the troughs and valleys of the wound system.
I think it's just a lot smoother now. Before it was
it is definitely much smoother.
There was usually a lot of questions and
really
people not understanding exactly how it worked and can I get rid of this? Is there any way I can get anyway? I felt as though there was. Sometimes.
If anything, the new risk system, it's really unfortunate. The iconography, for the most part, in Ego is really good, except sometimes the risk doesn't work the way all the other risks do, and then you have to remind everybody, no. This time you take the penalty, even though the other thing happened, and now you just get the banana. Like, people were very confused about, wait, do I take the penalty now? Do I not?
That was the other thing that was interesting, too, because some of the risks aren't always taking, the alien disgruntled tokens, of sometimes other things, like you're either losing coins or you're losing these things called alliance tokens.
Absolutely. That part was really neat. I liked how, very much in the same way as setup is never variable and the arc of a game of Ego might change a little bit in the middle, it is also the case that the risking, although I think the overall contours of it aren't quite as exciting, the specific transactional elements are much, much, much more varied in this edition. And that definitely makes the resource management aspect of it a little more interesting and in-depth.
So yeah, like I said, the alliance tokens, they're much like the scrolls, if you know the old Beowulf game, and they give you like random victory points or coins, or let you draw some cards, or let you get rid of some penalty tokens. Now there's another mechanism that I very much enjoy that's both in Beowulf and in Ego, is that some of the spaces you go to, it's like pay something to get a benefit. And sometimes it's pay a number of tokens or pay a value.
Right.
So sometimes it would say pay 3 victory point tokens. Well, you might have anywhere from, 1s to 3s to 5s. And so if it says pay 3 tokens, you're never allowed to exchange tokens.
No change.
So if I've only ever won 5-point tokens, then in order to pay for this, I'll have to use 3 5-point tokens. Whereas if I drew some alliance tokens or did other things, I might have 3 1-point tokens. Same with money. You might have these large, denominations of coins. I just really like that sort of, decision-making thing is like, is this worth it? Or, should I just take this smaller benefit because I know I'm going to want to get rid of these, lower tokens later?
Yeah, sometimes it leads to better decision-making, but sometimes I think that element makes it, again, just more smooth, more calculational, more straightforward. Like, there are, for example, there is a site that allows you to exchange 3 alliance tokens for 5 points. If I have 3 alliance tokens that add up to 4 or fewer points, this isn't an interesting decision. It's an automatic thing. And so it just makes it a straightforward, blunt transaction, very much in the same way that I feel like the risk has shifted subtly from an actual risk with tension to just another exchange, another form of exchange, another form of turning 3 points into 4, turning 4 points into 5. And I ultimately think that smoothness is not to the game's credit. I like the new elements of variability. I like the way that things are shaken up, the different resources that are implicated in a risk being different is interesting. I like the way the different boards work, but just overall the sense of smoothness, I think, drains some of the tension and even some of the trade-offs. And that overall is where I'm coming from in terms of preferring the original with respect to Ego.
So overall, I think this is good to be out there because Beowulf the Legend was fairly hard to get, if not impossible. And so now there's going to be a new version, which I think plays very quickly. The symbology is fantastic. Once you
Except for the cards.
Except for the cards. Well, the symbology of themselves is fine, but just knowing what they're called, or two of the colors are kind of anyway.
By the end of games, Walker, we still have people confusing one suit for another in the middle of a risk.
True. I'm wondering if also maybe the boards are a little crowded, because sometimes you're looking at the wrong space and thinking that you're actually doing a different auction. And so you're playing cards and you're no, wait, we're over here. We need these two symbols, not those two symbols. Anyway, and like we said, there's two different sort of module expansions. One just adds more to the boards, which just prolongs the game a bit longer. But
also gives you more to do with money.
Yeah, I was going to say, it makes it more exciting.
Yeah.
And then there's these circle ones that you're going to put in between systems, and they just add more variety and not much time, because it's pretty well show you have the symbols. Whoever has the most gets something, move on.
Yeah.
Anyway, thought they were great as well.
I, too, am glad that Ego is going to exist. I definitely think that people who are unfamiliar with this game system should give it a shot. I think it's a very interesting combination of auctions and press your luck, and I really like the overall sweep and the new kinds of variables that are introduced into the Ego formula. But the fundamental engine, I think, has taken a step back in terms of interest, and also, I think, both in terms of usability and in terms of thematic coherence, it has taken a massive step back from its incarnation in Beowulf the Legend. But as you say, better Ego than no Ego, since for many people Beowulf the Legend is not accessible, and I hope that a new audience can come to appreciate this fundamentally excellent design. But as I say, I think a lot of the changes are for the worse.
That's Ego by Reiner Knizia.
Well, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for So Very Wrong About Games. Please do take care of yourselves, take care of your precious time, and we appreciate your having decided to waste some of it with us.
Peace!
You've been listening to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games produced by Michael Walker and edited by Mark Big. You can find all our information at SoWrongGames.com. Special thanks to What Does It Eat for allowing us to use their most excellent song, FOS, as our intro. You can find them at WhatDoesItEat.com. We hope to see you again soon, and as always, try to be right, but remember, you're so very wrong.